what I'd like to talk to you all about is a concept called rentvesting. Now, we just talked about where the rents were going. We've talked about house prices. And for those of you that have tuned in, we have talked about rentvesting before, but we continually got feedback from people out there, and it was pretty simple, was, that's great, but how does it actually work, the nuts and bolts? Yeah. So Greg's been crunching the numbers. I've got some of the figures here. I won't lie to you. We're not going completely by the seat of our pants here. We did this about half an hour ago. There was a lot of stress. There was things being thrown around, but simply, Greg, just tell people, what is rentvesting as a concept?
Okay, rentvesting as a concept is live or rent where you want to live and invest where you can afford, to put it in simple terms.
Okay, so I live in Brighton.
Yep.
Or do we say Brighton?
Brighton.
Right, okay. Now, it's expensive. I don't even know why I live there, to be honest with you, other than that's just where I've been. And so, you know, for people that might want to be living in Brighton,
yep.
Can we sort of just break down for them? So just give us, and let's talk about apartments as a concept here, because this is probably relevant mainly to first home buyers.
We also want to compare apples with apples, so we're not skewing the figures. Thank God you're drawing, because I can't, my handwriting is terrible. Here we go, Brighton.
Okay, so in Brighton, yes, for an apartment, yep, what is the median price?
Median price would be 1.22 million.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that is a big number. So to buy the average apartment in Brighton, you need $1.22 million. Okay, and what's the average rent coming on something like that?
Rent, $600 a week.
Okay, that's what it's going to cost you to buy. That's what it'll cost you to rent. Now, give it to us in a monthly figure. What does that equal?
2.6 round figures.
$2,600 a month.
Per month, average.
Okay.
Yeah.
So if you're renting the average apartment in Brighton, you might love the area, you want to stay there, it's going to cost you about $2,600 a month. Now, if you want to buy that home, let's have a quick go here. So if we want to buy and we want, say, a 20% deposit, what's that?
240K.
240,000.
You've got stamps and legals.
So let's add stamps and so forth. What, another 60,000?
60 grand. So you need
Okay.
300,000 bucks.
So you're going to need roughly $300,000 cash. Okay. Now, if you're a first home buyer, you've probably spat your sandwich on the ground, drinks, whatever it is. Now, of course, maybe you might not go with a 20% deposit, but that is a huge amount of money that you need. Okay. Most people don't have that kind of cash. Now, on top of that, what's the size loan you're going to need to take out?
At least $1 million.
Okay. So if you need a $1 million loan,
yep, what is that roughly in monthly repayments? Let's have a look at here. 3.8 round figures, generally 3,800 per month. That's cheaper to rent.
All right. Now, the key thing with this here, okay, the cost of ownership to buy that, assuming you've got the $300,000, assuming you can afford a $1 million loan and you can borrow that much money, is $3,800, as opposed to paying rent of roughly $2,600. So that is $1,200 more. Now, sure, you've got an appreciating asset. Don't get me wrong. I'm not recommending renting for the rest of your life. But Greg, before you show me the alternative and how we can turn this into rentvesting, why is it such a big difference?
Well, typically in areas like Brighton, these high things, the yields, what they call yield, between the value of the property and what sort of rental you get is much lower in upper market areas. So the value, that's very expensive, but your rent is not. So the yields are much lower in areas like Brighton, etc.
Okay, so let's say I'm happy, yep, I'm living there at the moment, yep, and everyone's at me, I've got to buy a home.
Yes.
I'm paying $2,600 a month in rent. Yep. I like where I live. I'm happy with the suburb, but I want to get on the property ladder.
Yes.
I don't have that kind of cash.
Yes.
I don't want to be paying that much.
But you've got extra money free now.
The rent vesting part, I assume this is the renting part. Continue to rent.
Yep.
How do we become an investor then?
Okay, let's turn over. Let's choose another suburb. We're being...
We're going to go with South Bank. We did pre-prepare this.
We know it. So.
Okay, and obviously, those of you that have been watching will know, it's a big area for investors. All right, so what are we talking about is the median apartment price here.
545, so yeah,
545,000. Okay,
Yeah.
big difference to the 1.22 million bucks. And what are we seeing here as the rent that is coming off this?
on average.
Okay, so we're paying rent at 410
which
a week.
means
And what's that per month?
1780. 1780.
Okay, that's what it costs. That's the average rent here. Now, before you start saying, but I don't want to live in South Bank, that's okay. You can stay in Brighton. We're just doing these numbers here and we're going to pull it all together in a moment. All right, so if that's the case, now if we're going to come and buy this property on like for like,
Yep.
okay, with your 20% deposit, what's that?
110k.
110.
Stamp
duty.
and stuff to another 20k. So 130 you need, as opposed to what we looked at, 300.
Okay, so before we even get started, you might be able to afford that, $130,000. Now remember, you might go with a slightly lower deposit, right? If we look back here, that apartment that you love in Brighton, $300,000 versus $130,000, okay? So how does this all tie in together? All right, if that's what you're doing, what's the loan that you're then going to need to get?
435,000-ish.
And that would be what in monthly repayments?
About 1650. Straight away you go, whoa.
Okay, so look at that, ladies and gentlemen. It's a very, very simple formula. Now, this is all based on the reported figures by CoreLogic. You're not always going to get that positive spread. But as Greg said, typically areas that have got lower prices and don't command the same premium in terms of freestanding house prices and so forth are going to be closer, all right? So straight away, that's costing you nothing. Now, how does this all work? How does it tie it in? Well, you might have that much money, but you might not want to live there because you might want to live over here in Brighton. So keep paying your rent. Don't worry about buying this house that you're living in. Make your first home an investment property at a fraction of the price with a loan amount that you can afford and where the loan repayments are less than or equal to the rent. So it's a really, really simple proposition, isn't it, Greg?
The key thing about that as well, James, you can, you say, well, you can use this to then leverage either into another one like this or ultimately go into the property. So use this to gain wealth, to buy the one you want. So you get onto the property ladder.
Yeah.
Important, get onto the property ladder.
So remember, everyone, we say this all the time. It's not about timing the market, it's time in the market. So what Greg's saying is, you can afford this today, do this today. It's okay. If you say that you don't like this area, I don't know why, because I think it's fantastic, but if you don't like it, make it an investment property, because I tell you, there's thousands and thousands of tenants that love it. You can afford it. You'll get this spread, and you can still be a renter over here. But guess what? When you're at the dinner parties, the barbecues, you can say, I'm a homeowner, because you are. And you don't have to tell people you don't own your current home because you're now a rentvester. All right, Greg, is there any other sort of pitfalls or traps? We've obviously run through one example and it can skew depending on where those figures are, but I think that's, to me, it's a pretty compelling answer.
Very, very much so. And then the same thing is where you talk about there are some real big positives in buying an investment property. You're going to benefit from all your costs, like your stamp duty savings. All those things are tax deductible. You then got depreciation. So even your rent there is starting to look better. You're getting some really good returns. Ultimately, only negative is you might have to pay capital gains tax if you sell it. Our advice is not potentially sell it. Use that to leverage into another property, whether it's your home in Brighton or another investment property.
All right, I love it.
Yeah.
So Greg, that was great. Hopefully we had some new texters. It took me back to my days of primary school. I've got it all over my fingers, but hopefully that came through. That was good. So great, Greg. Thanks for that.
I'll take my water.
You take that over.
Yeah.